What's up everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create a multiplayer chat system, and you can see here we can run around and now really easily pressing enter the chat box. We can still look around but can also type something in here and pressing again enter, then it will be sent. You can see here all players can see it. You can also scroll while playing. You can scroll up and down to just check the chat history, and it's also very easy to implement. Then if you have watched this tutorial, you will just have one actor component that you only need to add to your player controller, and then you can directly see the chat system and start chatting. First of all, I create a new folder and call it chat. And in there, we're going to add all blueprint classes that we need for the chat system. Then you need to go to your map where you want to integrate the chat system and go to the world settings tab. If you cannot see it, enable them here. And then we need to check which player controller is selected. I have here now selected just the default player controller, but it's also totally fine if you have selected your custom player controller here. So if you just have the default player controller, then create one here. If you have already your custom player controller, then you can skip the step of creating one here. I'm adding this just to the chat folder and calling this BP game PC, whatever, and saving this. And then going to the map here again, to the content folder, and adding a new blueprint class actor component and calling this AC chat underscore PC. And this is the this is an actor component that you basically only have to add to your player controller. So I created here now the BP game PC, and also double check here it's selected in the map as player controller class here. I'm opening this one and adding the chat PC component here. Then we can compile and save and close this. Next, create here a new user interface with a blueprint and calling this WB underscore chat box. Opening that, and here create a new size box, and I'm setting this here from fill screen to desired. So we can directly see here when we change the width and height of the size box, you can directly see it in here. And I will go with values of, let's say, 400 in the width and 250 in the height. Of course, you can adjust it to your needs. In the size box, I'm gonna add a new vertical box. And in this vertical box, first a scroll box and an editable text. The scroll box, so select here the scroll box and set this to fill, and in the vertical alignment set it here to bottom align, so it looks like this. And for the editable text, so select this one. I'm gonna create decrease the font size here, let's say to 15. And also I want to set it by default to is enabled false. Then we go back to the content browser and create here a new user interface with a blueprint and calling this WB underscore chat entry. Opening this. And here we just add a new text block. Selecting the text block. I'm gonna set the font size same as we did for the editable text box, so to 15. Also want to set this here maybe to regular, the typeface. Searching here for auto wrap and enable auto wrap. So once the chat box line, or once the message is too long, it will just go to the next line and wraps the text automatically. So make sure to tick that, and also tick here is variable for this text block to true. And yeah, you can set this here to desired. You don't have to, but yeah. So then go to the graph. Here we only need the event construct, dragging in the text block, setting text, and here I create a new variable, calling this message, setting this to a string, and enable instance editable, and xPost on spawn, set this also to true. So once we create this chat entry widget, we can directly in there then set the chat message value. And once this here is constructed, so like on event begin play of this widget, we directly get the chat message and set the text with it. Then we can compile and save and go back to our chat box. And here we now want to create some functions. So go to graph and create a new function. First of all, we want to create a function called focus chat. And here we need the editable text and set the user focus. For the player controller, just get here get player controller. So if we trigger this function here, and let's say you run around in your map and look around and so, if you call this, and then it will trigger this focus of the text box, then you will go in the typing mode. And what we also need to do is, because we set this here by default to enabled false, the editable text, you need to set here to is enabled true. And then we also want to create a new variable, calling this chat focused, and setting this here to true. Then we also want to create the function for exit the chat. So I'm calling this exit chat. And here I directly set chat focus to false, getting the editable text, and set text to clear that. And also get here the editable text again and set enabled to false. And now we need to get the player controller. And here I'm now calling set input mode. I'm now calling set input mode game only, but you need to decide what you need. So if you can run around, look around and doing that stuff, then probably set input mode game only is correct. But if you have something like you're opening something and then you see your mouse cursor, then you probably have input mode game and UI. And if you then exiting the chat, then you want to go to game and UI. So here's the place where you need to decide, maybe also look in other blueprints, what game mode or input mode you currently have, and deciding on that what you're gonna do here when exiting the chat. So also if you're maybe in the pause menu, then you probably also want to go to game and UI. I'm just going here with game UI, but just want to have that set. Now we need another function, call this scroll, and adding here input be up. And this will be triggered once we're scrolling up or down with the scroll wheel of the mouse. Yeah, to maybe check that the player can go in the chat history, read them there a bit. What we need now is a reference to the scroll box. So we need to go to the designer another time, selecting the scroll box and make sure is variable is ticked, because then we can go to the graph and use it here. Here I'm setting the scroll offset. And getting here another scroll box reference. Then getting the scroll offset, which returns us the current scroll offset. Then we also need a new variable, calling this scroll multiplier, setting this to float, and by default we maybe set this to 60. So this just defines how sensitive it is when we're scrolling up or downwards, how much it scrolls. And here we are now getting a select float node, and we get it the scroll multiplier, multiply this with the select float. And if we're scrolling up, then we want to set here in pin A, want to set this here to -1 and this to be to 1. So this is -1, this is 1. So this defines the direction here in which we scroll. And here to the scroll offset, we're gonna add an add node, and adding this here. Then we also need to prevent that we just adding all the time new scroll offset if we're scrolling all the time upwards, but we are already most up in the scroll box, or that we continue scrolling down in the scroll box, but we are already completely scrolled down. So we're adding here a clamp float node, and connecting this here. For the min value, we're choosing 0, and for the max value, we get here another scroll box and get the scroll and offset. Get scroll offset of and connecting this here with max. Then we can compile and save. And now we go over to the event graph, and here on delete these two, we only need event construct now. And here we get a player controller. From there we get component by class. So what we're now doing is, when opening again your player controller class, we are getting directly a reference to this actor component that is here added to your player controller. So we're getting the player controller, getting component by class, choosing here the AC chat PC component, and storing this in a variable. And I will just call this chat PC component ref, and connecting this here with the event construct. So now we create here a new function and calling this add chat message. And here I'm adding a new input pin, calling this just message, setting this to string, creating here a widget. This is the chat entry. So searching here for chat entry. The message we directly connect here. Then we get the scroll box reference, adding a child to it. And the child is here, the return value of this created chat entry widget. And then we get another one of this scroll box and say here, scroll to end. So each time a new message is sent, added to the text box, to the scroll box, it will also just make sure that we see it, that it scrolls to the end of the scroll box, scrolls down. And then we go back to the event graph and add here, or what we need to do is going to designer, clicking on the editable text, scrolling all the way down, and here it says on text changed, and we need on text committed. So add this here, click on the plus, add text committed. And here we first check if the commit method, searching here for equal, make sure here to select this one, equal enum, select this, and we want to set here on enter. This is how we want to commit the text. So basically how we want, when the player enter the text, how the text should be then requested to be sent. So I'm gonna add here branch, and then I'm gonna add here a sequence node on then 0. We search here, or adding here a new branch, and then getting here from the text, converting this here to a string, checking if this one is empty, because if you have nothing entered in the text box and you try to send it, then we just want to do nothing or exit the chat again, which would basically happen then here on the sequence node, exit chat. Yeah, so here it will just check, is the text empty? If it is, or if the text, like if the editable text, if the entered text in there is empty, nothing happens. Afterwards, it will then trigger here then 1 and exit the chat. And on false, it will first send the text, send the message, and then also exit the chat. For sending the text message, we didn't implement the function yet in our chat component. We'll do that in a bit. Or yeah, we'll do that right now. So go and open your chat PC component, actor component. So before we implement here the events that actually send a text message, we also need to do some other stuff in here. So let's do that first. So an event begin play, we also want to make sure to just showing the chat box when we are playing, because right now if we play, yeah, we cannot see the chat box. So what you need to do is create here a new user interface widget blueprint and call this wb_chat UI. And opening this, here we're going to add a new, or I'm adding a new overlay. And in this overlay, I'm adding the chat box, making sure to set this to bottom align and left, and then just adding a bit of padding, maybe 50, or let's say 100. And then we can close this. In the chat PC actor component, here we check first get owner, because the owner is the player controller. We cast here, so don't cast to your custom player controller, just cast to default cast to player controller. We can convert this here to pure cast and check if it is locally controlled. Is like not locally controlled, is local player controller. Adding here branch. If that is true, then we want to create for this local player here on true. We're gonna create a widget, selecting here the chat UI, promoting this directly here to variable chat UI ref, getting from there the chat box, also storing this in the variable chat box ref. Then also delete the event here. We're adding some inputs. Enter. There we get the chat box ref, and we focus to chat. Then we get mouse wheel up and mouse wheel down. We get the chat box ref, calling here the scroll function, triggering on pressed, setting this to true, and for down we set this here to down. Also make sure to select connect this here. Then now we implement the events to actually send the chat message. So I'm adding here custom event, calling this send chat message on server. Make sure to set this here run on server and reliable also ticked. Then getting the game state, getting here get player array to get all current player states, or getting a reference to all players that are currently in game. From here we get a for each loop, and from all player states, because each player has its own player state and also has its own player controller. What we're going to get from here is from the player state the corresponding player controller. So get player controller, and we know we have to the player controller the chat PC component added. So from here we directly get component by class, choosing here as for the component class the AC chat PC, and in there we trigger an event that we also can create in here directly. So again, add custom event, we're calling this add chat message owning client, and yeah, as I named it here already, you need to set it here to run on owning client and reliable true. And we're gonna add here an input, calling this message, setting this to string, getting the chat box ref, and calling the add chat message, and connecting this here. And here we call the add chat message on owning client, connect this here with the loop body, and connect the message here with this event here to add a pin directly to this. So this here is basically then called on the server, and this event here is not necessarily called in this same blueprint here. It is basically then calling this here in all players, on all players. So yeah, every time the server is executing something on a client, you need to make sure that the custom event that is triggered on the client executed on the client. So it also execute on the client itself, setting this to run on the client, and then locally the players add to their chat the message. And now we can go back, before we compile and save, go back to chatbox. And here we can call to send the message. And we do that by getting here the chat component ref and sending here, calling the send chat message on server. So now do not connect this here on true. So make sure here if the text box is not empty, so on false, we gonna call this send chat message on server event. And for the message, we not directly want to input here the message, because we also want to add the information about who has sent the chat message. So I'm getting here the player controller, getting the player state, and from there getting the player name. And yeah, if we just play now, this is like this desktop and the big number like this name. But if you're playing with Steam enabled in standalone game, or if you have using EOS as your default subsystem, it will take then this name. And I'm adding here a append node. Here I'm adding this one, and for the chat message, directly connecting this here, and then input this here in the message. Before we check out the final result, I need to say that I forgot two small things. So first of all, in the chat PC, you need to make sure to actually see the chat UI, to also add this here to viewport. Like this here. And also, not necessary but nice to have, when we go to the chat box designer, clicking here on the editable text, that we see here a hint text like enter to chat. And then we can go in here. I'll test this now with 3 players, and let's say as listen server, and then see each other in the final result. So here we are. Down here you can see the server, and up here 2 clients. Let's just type something with one into a client. You can see here all players can see it. And again, we try something here. Hello. You can see we can press enter, type something. We can still look around, but of course not running around anymore, because then we would type something. But once we send it again with enter, then you can see here we can directly run around, look around again. And I hope you enjoyed watching this tutorial. I hope it helped you. If you have any questions left, feel free to ask me on my Discord server or in the comments. And that was the tutorial, and thank you for watching.